The earliest hominids, from which the modern man derives, lived on Earth more than 4 million years ago. Initially, these primitive men were quite similar to other animals, but over the course of millions of years, man began to differentiate himself from the other creatures of the animal kingdom. His high cognitive ability allowed these hominids to create rustic tools that would serve to shape the world around them, hence beginning the Thelithic Era. The first men created the first weapons, like clubs, axes, spears, and the first steels and arrows. But none of these had as much impact as the control of fire. Man was already aware of fire, as natural phenomena like lightning or erupting volcanoes could ignite natural fires. But everything changed when the first man mastered the technique needed to create fire. The control of fire changed the lives of primitive men. Fire was important to chase away predators, to protect from cold temperatures and darkness, and to prepare food, of course. This new habit of roasting and cooking animal meat allowed man to access new sources of protein that would be central to the neurological development of his descendants. But the fire also changed these hominids' biological sleep cycle. Before fire, they gathered themselves shortly after nightfall, and now they gathered around campfires. This new habit created a new space of socialization, establishing a fruitful environment for language development. Primitive men gathered around the fire, and one of the main talking points was the stories and adventures of their ancestors. These stories were orally transmitted from generation to generation. But these first men also felt the need to register more permanently their existence on our planet, and for that, they relied on art. Throughout the globe, man left his mark engraved in stone through rock drawings, and with that, took his first steps towards civilization. The prehistoric man lived for millions of years as a nomad. His community survived by hunting and collecting fruit and roots. That is why men lived in constant migrations in search of food. But a revolution was about to start, which would forever change this old way of life. This revolution happened with the mastery of agricultural techniques. Man learned how to sow the land and reap the fruit of his work. This new habit allowed man to gradually settle down on his piece of land, leaving his nomadic ways behind. The first villages began to emerge near the floodplains of the rivers, as these were the most fertile land. Since most places where man settled down were not adequate to grow food throughout the year, man began to give preference to the cultivation of cereals, which, besides their nutritional value, could be stored for longer periods. However, some of these cereals were often attacked by pests and rodents. During that same historical period, man developed the ability to domesticate animals as well. The dog was one of the first to be domesticated, as it would be used as a working animal, helping to safeguard communities while engaging in hunting and livestock-related activities. Some basic requirements had to be fulfilled before an animal could be considered domesticated. It could not compete with humans for food. Therefore, animals that fed on grazing or leftovers would be the ideal option. Ideally, these animals could not feel panic easily. However, if that was not possible, they would have to behave like a pack when frightened. By forming large groups, they would be more easily controlled by their owners and their herding dogs. These animals were domesticated in order to provide food for men, having also to reach their adulthood rapidly, thus increasing their productivity. Both agriculture and livestock served other purposes besides food. The animal's leather was used for several different purposes, both for clothing and the production of other items. And animals, like sheep, besides providing meat and milk, also supplied their wool. Vegetables, like flax and cotton, were also grown to serve as fabric. These small villages started to produce surpluses, trading and exchanging their products with other villages. Commerce began to slowly emerge, getting increasingly common over time. The mastery of these technologies created the basic conditions for the emergence of the first cities. After mastering agriculture and livestock, man gradually abandoned his nomadic lifestyle and societies became sedentary with the first permanent settlements. This cut with the nomadic past became known as the Neolithic Revolution. Some settlements kept developing themselves and their population began to grow in numbers. This new form of society began to divide labor, creating classes of experts in certain activities, and thus the division of society in social classes was getting clearer. Trading with other settlements was also more common. Some of these settlements became trading posts, which boosted their growth and development, with the first cities now appearing. Scholars claim that the first cities were born on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia, today's Iraq. The cities of Uruk and Eridu are considered to be the first cities founded by men. With that, the first great civilization, today known as the Sumerians, was born. The vast number of products that were demanded by the cities could turn into a logistical bedlam, but instead, it stimulated the mundane use of a new invention, the wheel. It is likely that the invention of the wheel derived from the observation of trunks being rolled to move heavy cargo. The first wheels were massive and had bumpy axles, but those mechanisms were perfected over the years. The lubrication of the axles and the invention of the wheel with rims made them much more efficient. But the decisive factor was the use of animal drag vehicles like oxen, donkeys, and horses, making wheels even more popular. This new invention quickly revolutionized the way man could transport goods and people. And the wheel soon entered the battlefield. Chariots were systematically used as combat vehicle in ancient battles. Contrary to popular belief, the native people of the Americas were already knowledgeable of the wheel when the Europeans discovered the New World. However, it was barely used, as Native Americans did not have access to animals like the horse, for instance. Taking into consideration that limitation, these people opted for other means that they considered more efficient to transport their cargo. The impact of the wheel's invention altered many areas, not only transportation. The wheel was also used in several other mechanisms, which would be crucial to the evolution of mankind. In Mesopotamia, between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, a place known as the birth of civilization, some men started to live in cities. The urbanization process provided men with many benefits. Trade was now blossoming in the cities, and scientific breakthroughs became more frequent. Nevertheless, urban life also increased the number of conflicts and disagreements among men. With the intent to pacify and circumvent conflicts between the members of society, laws were instituted. The first written code is known as the Code of Hammurabi. This compendium of Babylonian laws, written in stone, is a reference point to how justice was applied in the most different cases. These could be disputes over property or offenses against life. This code of laws was written in 2000 BC during the reign of King Hammurabi of Babylon. The kingdom of Babylon was the apex of mankind at its time, and Hammurabi had a decisive role in its establishment. The king proclaimed himself as someone who had been sent by God to create a fair and orderly society, and that he had received such authority from Marduk, a Babylonian deity. Before the emergence of written codes, laws were based on the community traditions and had a religious basis in most cases. Those who did not respect the group's customs had to suffer different forms of reprisal. They could be mocked by others, turned into outcasts within those same societies, or subjected to banishment or even capital punishment. But social groups with different customs tended to coexist. Thus it became necessary to establish laws that would be above the traditions of each group. The renowned Code of Hammurabi had precisely that objective, and the famous sentence, "an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth," inspired in Lex Talionis, synthesizes the spirit of the code, and so every offense will receive a proportional punishment. The laws were engraved on large basalt stones and were exhibited in a public square. One of these stones was discovered in 1901 by French archaeologists and is now on display at the Louvre Museum in Paris. More than 200 laws were written in it in cuneiform writing. Most crimes were punishable by the death penalty, but the life of the perpetrator of the crime was not always the one at the stake. If a poorly built house collapsed, killing the owner's son, the builder's son would be killed too to make justice. Changing the laws was extremely difficult since they were set in stone. They remained unchanged for centuries. Hammurabi's code influenced several other law codes that appeared afterwards, like the ancient Jewish law brought by Moses. Men only managed to live in large communities, marching towards civilization, after the first roots of law were established in Mesopotamia. After the foundation of the very first cities, more than 3,000 years before Christ, the first civilizations appeared. Mesopotamia was the birthplace of the first major civilizations, including the Sumerian. The Sumerians are known as the first people to create a civilization. Nonetheless, the Sumerian civilization did not have a central government, as the Sumerian cities were autonomous as city-states. The Sumerian cities began to grow in size, and consequently, their administration became quite complex, which was the proper setting for the emergence of writing. Men began to write using pictography both in Mesopotamia and in Egypt, which is the art of registering something through images. The Sumerians invented cuneiform writing, whereas the Egyptians used hieroglyphics. Cuneiform writing was done on clay tablets, particularly to make accounting, commercial, and property records that were essential for city administration. If they wanted to keep records for long periods of time on clay tablets, those would have to be baked in ovens to withstand time. Centuries later, the Egyptians began to make their records on papyri, similar to paper sheets made from the fibers of the papyrus. The use of pictograms as a form of writing had several limitations. One of the biggest obstacles to use pictograms was that it worked well for simple matters, but was quite limited for complex subjects. The number of images that had to be kept in mind to communicate was enormous, which restricted the pictorial writing only to scribes and priests. It took centuries to decipher what the Egyptians' pictograms were telling us, and the discovery of their meaning happened by pure luck. It took place when the official Bouchard of Napoleon's army was building a fort in Egypt and encountered the Rosetta Stone. This granite block has a decree of Pharaoh Ptolemy V. The decree was written in hieroglyphs, then transcribed into Demotic, which was a simplified Egyptian writing form and used in everyday life, and also into Greek. And, using the Greek, it was possible to discover what those mysterious signs really meant. The evolution of writing led to the creation of phonetic alphabets. They would no longer be depicted by illustrations. Instead, they would be represented by signs related to a certain unity of sound. This made writing much easier and accessible, simplifying communication. But nonetheless, writing would remain restricted to literate elites for centuries. The invention of writing was surely one of humanity's major breakthroughs. From this invention, men could register their existence. The record of their deeds and discoveries, their culture, and their laws would now fight against time, which consumes everything, trying to echo their history through eternity. Trade has been a part of mankind since the earliest days of civilization. Tribes exchanged their own surpluses for products which other tribes were offering. Such trade was based on barter, in other words, the exchange of goods without currency. Barter was the foundation of most business transactions, but this practice had several limitations. Whenever a fisherman wanted to exchange fish with the baker's bread, the latter had to be interested in the former's fish. If that was not the case, the fisherman would not get the bread he wanted. To have it, the fisherman would have to exchange his fish with another person and get some product of the baker's interest. Currency appeared to solve the stalemate between buyers and sellers. The first proto-coins emerged to simplify these changes. The concept of currency started to appear simultaneously in several places around the globe. And the currency of ancient peoples did not always look like what we consider to be money today. Salt was a currency in ancient times. Salt was an essential good because it was imperative for the conservation of food such as fish and meat. Salting them increased their edible condition. Due to its great utility, salt became currency. During the era of the Roman Empire, the legion soldiers were paid with salt, hence the name salary. In turn, metals have always been highly valuable materials, and so copper, silver, and gold ingots have been used to establish trade because it is easy to exchange them for products. The first coins that resemble what we know today appeared as time moved on. Due to its practicality, the use of metal coins started to spread throughout the world. The Greeks stood out in this regard for being acquired with the minting process, and so the Greek coins spread all over the Mediterranean. Silver and gold coins became quite common as a means of trade. And, in order to increase the security of transactions, coins became standardized. Its dimensions and weight would have to respect pre-established standards. To safeguard their validity, coins exhibited state-made stamps. The first coin counterfeiters quickly appeared. They used materials with inferior quality in their coin replicas. Coin scrapping with precious metals was another common practice. After being scrapped, some of the precious material was kept by the counterfeiter, who later reintroduced the coin into circulation, as if it had the same value. The emergence of the paper money is credited to the Chinese, but its dissemination around the world was slow, since the production technique behind paper money was a state secret. The appearance of currency further increased trade activities and the creation of value stores, wealth that enabled new breakthroughs for the following stages of the civilization process.